Hello, Steve White, Trek Boy 89 for Steve Arts 89. Well, I did a video recently after I started to watch a live podcast that Robert Burnett did, where he was talking about Star Trek, and he was going on about why he hates the modern Star Trek. And I have a lot of issues with modern Star Trek. It has some issues, has some flaws. And some of the things he was going on about, I just thought were just purely his personal issues and his idea of what Star Trek was or should be, or what the characters was or should be, and how the modern Star Trek creators strayed from what he would have done or how he saw things. And these things weren't necessarily violations or bad, they were just different creative takes and different tastes. And he was basically being elitist and arrogant, and so I did a video about that, went for about 15 minutes. But then they actually went into, I paused it and then they went back into what the video was about. Was this guy, Alvaro Zenos Amaro, basically did a study, or tried to do a study, of how intelligent Star Trek is by era. He looked at the original, like the Roddenberry era, with the 79 Star Trek episodes and the 22 animated episodes, and then the Berman era with like 178 Next Generation, 176 Deep Space Nine, 174 or something Voyager, and I think 98 for Enterprise. And then he looked at the Discovery era the Kurtzman era with like 65 Discovery, I think, I can't remember, like 30 Picard, 40 Prodigy, I think Strange New World's up to 23, 24 at the moment. They'll get to 46. Either way, they just went through and put them all together, and the idea was that they were going to assess them based on the scripts, I think, because he did explain how this was done, but the idea was to look at the grammar, the language, how it's used, how intelligently it's used, how complicated it is, if they use problem solving to solve problems, or whether they just use action, and just looking at how intelligent the shows were, how intellectual they were, how they use language versus emotion versus action, all these sort of things. And this stuff is measurable when you actually look at it based on the scripts and all that, and it was kind of interesting. And when he looked at it, and what was I missing? Lower Decks had 50 episodes. That's what I was forgetting. I knew I was forgetting something. When he looked at the results, he found that, because he ran it through like 4 different AI systems, and they sort of all assessed the intellectual integrity of these episodes, and he has these intellectual integrity scores. And Roddenberry got 77%, Berman got 79%, and Kurtzman got 59% average when you average out the estimates from all these different AIs. So Berman had 3%, was 3% more intellectual than the Roddenberry era, and Kurtzman was 25% less intelligent. So that old 25% rule, is applicable in many ways for the show. And of course, I'm loving this, and so was Rob. But they also did a variation of this, because he moved different things in and out. Like he removed, I think, Star Trek the Animated Series, because that was, a kid's show. I didn't really feel like it spoke down to children. But when he did remove that, the score did rise a little bit for the Roddenberry shows. It went to 80%, with the Berman era being 79.4%, so 1% less intelligent than the original Star Trek. And Kurtzman dropped down. I think they removed the animated series from Kurtzman's era as well, so Prodigy and Lower Decks. And then their intellectual integrity score dropped down by 31%. So there is a measurable lack of intelligence in Kurtzman's stories and scripts. Now, is that what it is? Or is it, because one of the things that Kurtzman does, aside from use more action, sometimes I think, they also use more emotional reasoning and a more emotional, personal feelings to deal with stories, or the stories are about people's reactions and experiences, and those are not going to, or they could be explained in a very intellectual way, but for the most part they're shown and felt on some level where you actually are feeling what the actors are projecting that the characters are feeling. So is it a matter of different types of stories and ways of looking at things, or is it purely just less intelligent? I think a little bit of both. I think there's an element of that. Like with Enterprise, surprisingly, Enterprise came up and Strange New Worlds came up around the same level. And when you think about Enterprise had less refined crew that were supposed to be more relatable, so they used more commonly used language, and they did respond more with force and action and so forth, and that was part of the learning curve for those characters. So that would sort of make sense that would compare to something like Strange New Worlds, which is just less intelligent and has more action and less exploration of things. So that kind of makes sense as well. But yeah, I'm just wondering how people perceive this. And I think it's interesting. I think it does show the contemporary nature, the sort of talking down, I think, and trying to simplify things and make things more accessible to the general audience. But I think that also has an element of emotionalism and looking at things outside of just this sort of patriarchal, intellectualized, literary sort of way of dealing with things and dealing with things on an emotional level, which I think is part of humanity, is something that they should explore in Star Trek. So there may be a little bit of bias in this overall that doesn't take that into account, which is a very misogynistic sort of view. But aside from that, I'm sure that it is an indication of the difference in the shows on not just that level, but also the intellect. So as soon as I sort of started talking about this, I realised, you know what, this may be a little unfair. There may be a little bit of the storytelling in the modern Star Treks that is based more on feeling and emotion that isn't being registered on the same way as the other Star Treks, which were more literal and intellectual on that level, but it doesn't make them less valuable. But I'm still sure that they, even if they took that into account, there would still be that difference. So I'm just going to say that, even though I'm now realising and acknowledging that is a factor they probably didn't acknowledge out of misogyny and arrogance on the part of these two men looking at this show, and seeing these things they see as feminine as not being part of the human experience and not something that should be involved in what they see as military or work, professional science, all those sort of elements. But it is something that it's part of humanity. It's something we really shouldn't be ignoring, and it's very much a masculine thing to deny emotions and don't deal with any of those elements. So I'm now seeing a flaw in this study, but I think it still does indicate a few things, at least a part of the bulk of the writing and that and the way that the shows are realised. But I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the whole situation. I was really enjoying that until I started to realise it may have been a bit biased. But still, I'm pretty sure I still want to enjoy that part of it. And I believe that even taking that into account, the levels would still be around the same, and there would be that difference between the modern Star Trek and the Berman and Roddenberry eras. But yeah, so feel free to check out the channel, maybe ding the bell, because you're not going to see my videos come up in your feed very often because YouTube doesn't like small content creators, so you might have to actually look for stuff occasionally. But yeah, I'm going to go and just contemplate all of this a bit more.